So I love this movie, and I'm kind of cynical, so
Oh,
I was
good.
really happy that it just melted my heart.
Oh, that's
So
very
that's
nice.
nice.
well done,
Very
you guys
pleased.
did such a great job.
Thank you.
So as you know, my readers are screenwriters.
Yes.
And a lot of them are working on kid-friendly, family-friendly screenplays. So is there sort of a list of secrets that you can share about what makes that a success?
I think we could talk about the next 6 months about things that we'd learned that worked and didn't
Yeah.
work. And yes, there's so much. I would say
Yeah.
I'm going to
You go
talk
first.
about
Yeah.
talk about a thing. So
Mhm.
this was on new ground for us because it was a sequel, and neither of us had worked on a sequel before. Done sort of other episodes of a TV show. It was a really different thing, and what we were trying to do was find an architecture for the film that could make it not feel like a retread of the first film. So often you see a sequel and you're sort of trying to find ways to reset the characters and basically tell the same story again, or you sort of feel you sit. And the sequels that we felt worked, we watched a lot of sequels, were the ones that felt like an organic next step for the character. And I think part of the problem with why sequels don't always work is sometimes there isn't an organic next step for that character.
Right.
If Mr. Darcy has got together with, Elizabeth Bennet, that's the end of that story. You don't necessarily need the child rearing years. And, there's not Taxi Driver 2, and, there's good reasons for these things. But there are a lot of stories for Paddington. There's a lot of source material. And we always felt that there could be a sequel. And we really tried to find a kind of model for a movie that could work and be the next step for him. And in the first film, we'd brought him to London, he'd found a house and he'd found a family, but we'd never sent him out into the wider world. And so one of the first things we started talking about was the community and seeing Paddington at large, as it were, and sort of meeting the rest of the neighbours. There's a scene right at the end of the first film where Paddington's having a snowball fight with the family. And even when we were filming it, I was sort of saying to David, the producer, it's a shame there aren't more people here. And at the time, I just sort of meant extras. And then when we started talking about the story of the sequel, we kind of realised Paddington's such a great community figure. He would know everyone really quickly. So we started thinking about Paddington going out into the world. And then we started thinking about Aunt Lucy and his values and these amazing kind of this sort of old time, very decent, kind philosophy that he has as a character. He's not a classically flawed protagonist where, he doesn't, we spent a lot of time thinking about flaws and what life lesson he can learn, and he doesn't really have that kind of arc. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but it's a tricky one to answer. And then we started thinking about, who are there any role models, in movie history of characters who are not flawed in that classical way? And we started thinking about Frank Capra and those great 1930s movies, especially Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, where you take these good characters from a small town normally and send them to the big city and see how their values
Paddington's
withstand
Jimmy
the sins.
Stewart, basically.
Yeah, and then we kind of and they begin to lose confidence in their values, and then hopefully if it's a happy film, they get it back at the end. And then once we found that spine of the story, we were quite happy to start, dressing a story on it.
I also read that you watched Charlie Chaplin as well.
Yeah, lots of Chaplin, Laurel and Hardy, because those sequences are really hard. I mean, anyone writing those probably I get asked this a lot, actually, about the physical sequences, because a lot of it, as Paul says, you've got to get your spine. Once you get your sort of spine and what the story means is quite important. We did spend a lot of time on that. But once you've got all that stuff then you've got to make it funny and make every scene have, something. You've got adults and you've got kids, but everyone likes sort of slapstick and someone falling over. So, those were. We had people to sort of that help us with that. We have clown. We had a clown come in, a physical, who can do the physical stuff. But then when you write it down, it doesn't sound very funny. Paddington wets the window, rubs his bum from left to right, turns. Dr. Jaffrey gives a thumbs up. Doesn't sound very funny on the page, but you just got to trust it's going to sort of work, I guess.
Sure. Now, you've mentioned Paddington doesn't really have a flaw, but you could argue that his flaw was his lust for marmalade.
Yes, although I wouldn't want to heal it. I think
Yes,
that's what
that's the thing,
because
a flaw
and
is
he's also
healed.
klutzy because he's a bear and he's a fish out of water. But we talked about flaws you want to heal and flaws you don't want to heal, and you would never want to take Paddington's bearishness away from him. Or whenever he goes to do something, he will mess up, because he goes for it. He's quite sort of front foot and he's quite sort of confident and he'll do his best. And it will go wrong because he's Paddington and he's hopeless and he's not a barber and he's not a window cleaner, and he's not even a chef. You know, he's going to make a mess. But you wouldn't want to fix that, I suppose, and that sort of seemed to be the difference between a sort of a character flaw and a
sure, of
temporal
course.
one.
And he ends up using it to do better, to do something better.
Marmalade
And
makes
I
the
love
world
that
go
part.
round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Simon, what I wanted to ask you is that a lot of my interviews with writers have been people who started as actors.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if you could tell me what you learned about writing from acting.
Loads, actually. It's quite interesting. I think especially working on this film, we had to send the script to actors. And being an actor, I know what happens when you get a script. You basically, it's a very selfish profession. You go, how good am I gonna be in this film? So immediately you flick through, you don't go, you don't really care about the story. I mean, of course you do a bit, but really you want to go, why has he sent it to me? What's my response going to be? And so the better that part is, the greater chance he's going to sort of take it. And knowing how that works. But what it does do, I suppose, is mean you never gloss over any character, no matter how small. They've got to have a hook. They've got to have something unique, a unique voice. It couldn't be anyone else's voice. Because an actor will do that. They'll go, why haven't they asked, why haven't they asked Ian McKellen to do this? Why me? And if it's a really distinctive voice, they'll go. I mean, Hugh Grant was an example. We were very nervous about sending it to him, but I think we really enjoyed writing that character so much, and we would do passes over passes. Going, it's not ready yet to send to him because we want to make it better and better. And then he got it, and he doesn't like to do much work, and he went, yeah, I think I'll do this because we'd spent that time on it. And I think being an actor, you understand that you've just got to make every single character, no matter how small, have its own thing which an actor can bring something to it.
And opening sentence descriptions. That's something
They're
we
always
actually
useful,
did.
yeah.
Because we sort of, when we sent it out, we always kind of went, what's the first stage direction
that's a
about the
good point.
character? And quite often we'd not bothered with a particularly good one because we knew who the character was. And so then we'd sort of try and write something quite poetical to make it seem like the character had depth and substance.
Yes,
In fact, you go,
helps.
it's a bin, man.
Well, that's wonderful advice. Do you have any other advice for screenwriters who are working on family-friendly movies?
I'd say one thing we had, which is a difference to Paddington 1, was our villain. So we did want the villain to be more... Nicole Kidman was brilliant, and that character did its thing, and it was great because she had knives, and it was... But we wanted to have a villain in this that was more like Toy Story 3, in that when you meet... Lotso, yeah. When you meet him, he seems like a nice guy, and I think that was a good lesson for us, I think, was to go, let's meet our villain and not have him... He was sort of funny, but he's not your villain straight away, and so he turns more villainous as the story goes. So having a sort of organic villain was quite important to us and was something we think we've achieved.
Yeah, I think so. It's a very different structure to the last film, and I suppose I think you're much more instinctive than I am. I'm sort of I always want to find the shape of it and the architecture, and so I would say for me that my personal journey is to realise I need to learn to watch my references, and I watch them again and again and again and try to dig out what I like about them and really try and analyse why I like what I like about them, and then even occasionally go, I love this film, it's perfect, but actually the second act isn't that great, and why isn't it? And try to be sort of quite forensic, sort of quite critically forensic of it, as well as enthusiastically.
Yeah, you're quite good. Yeah, finding a model is quite good. You don't end up copying that, but you look to something like Toy Story 2 and you go, how does that work? And he sort of goes away from everyone and ends up in a sort of prison. But
and if you can find different ones, I think it's great. I mean, the Chaplin thing that I was going to say, just to finish off on that, because you touched on that a lot, but was also a tonal thing, and I think that's maybe more of it's a directing thing as well as a writing thing, but you've really got to be the custodian of the tone. What I always loved about Chaplin was I laugh, kids laugh at the same time, and we're all moved by it, and it was sort of try and kind of keep that mood and that tone, because you sort of go, especially if you're writing jokes, it's quite easy to write a cynical joke or a joke that sort of slightly punctures the scene or undercuts it, and we really try to avoid doing that, because so we'd throw a lot out even though we thought it was funny, because we thought it spoilt the flavour of the scene and just you didn't buy it. So I think holding onto the tone is good.
yeah.
Thank you. I wish you the absolute best with this movie.
Thank you very much.